Hi, this is Krista at the Secret Yarnery. Today we're making our Berry Biscuit Square for the Secret Stitches Cal 2021. This is part one of the Secret Stitches Cal 2021. To make this square, you will need yarn. I am using Savor by Ice Yarns. It is 100% Draylon acrylic, 200 grams, 330 meters. And it calls for a 5mm needle, so I'm going to be using a 6mm hook for this pattern. It is a size 4 worsted weight yarn. And I'll link this color in the description box down below as well if you'd like to use the same color. But of course you're welcome to use any yarn at all. We'll get approximately 3 of these squares from one skein of yarn, if you are wondering. It's about 65 to 70 grams per square. To make the Berry Biscuit Square, I'll be using a 6mm crochet hook, 4 stitch markers, a darning needle, and a pair of scissors. So let's get started. Start by making a slip knot, leaving a long enough tail to sew in with a needle later. Shrink it down and put it onto your hook. And chain 40. 1, 2, 3, 39, and 40. There's my chain 40. And now chain 1 more, so just 1 extra chain. So that is a chain 41. Now I'm going to work into my back loops. So I'm just going to be turning my chain over. This is optional. If you'd rather work into the front, that's fine. But just turn your chain over, and we're looking for these little bumps along the back, these little camel bumps. And now to count your chains, we're just counting these camel bumps along the back. So there is 1, 2, 3, and here is 4. So wrap your yarn and into the 4th stitch, just getting that 1 loop onto your hook, 1 double crochet. Our chain counts as a double crochet for this pattern, so that counts as 2 double crochets. Wrap your yarn and make 1 double crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last one 5. So counting your chain, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So there is our set of 7. Chain 1 and skip 1. So we're going to skip that next camel bump right here and go into the 2nd. So wrap your yarn and into the 2nd stitch, 1 double crochet. And we're doing sets of 7, so 6 more double crochets, 1 into each stitch. There's 3. And I'm just sliding that camel bump onto my hook. Four, 5, 6, and there is 7. There's our set of 7 double crochets. Chain 1, skip 1. So just keep the camel bumps facing up, or your back loops facing up. Skip the next camel bump and go into the 2nd. So wrap your yarn and into the 2nd stitch, 7 double crochets, 1 into each of the next 7 stitches. So we're just building our sets of 7. So we have 3 sets done. Keep going along your row, making your sets of 7 with a chain 1, skip 1, and I'll meet you when you get to the end of this row. Quick tip, if you are working along your chain and you give it a little pull, if your chain is much tighter, see the top of my double crochets is really loose and my chain is really tight, that means I should probably frog this back and start again with a larger hook just for my chain, a 6.5 or 7 millimeter hook for my chain. Or if I don't have a larger hook, I intentionally chain loose for my starting chain. So that's just a tip if you find your chain is super tight and your work is starting to curl up a bit like that. Use a larger hook or make larger loops for your starting chain. At the end of your row, keep going. You'll make your last double crochet of that set of 7 into the very last camel bump, just like that. So that finishes row 1. Chain 2, 1 and 2. If you chain really tightly, you can still do a chain 3 for your turning chain. For me, I find it's a lot straighter edge with a chain 2. And turn your work. This is our 4 is more round. So we're going to make 2 double crochets, 1 into each of the next 2 stitches. So here will be our first stitch, and you want to make sure you have both strands of that stitch on your hook. So there's 1 and 2. So wrap your yarn and into the next stitch, 1 double crochet and 1 double crochet into the next. Our chain counts as our first stitch of the row, so that's 3 double crochets. So 4 is more into the next stitch. Right here, we're going to be doing our popcorn. So wrap your yarn and make 4 double crochets into the 4th stitch. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Pull your hook up, making a larger loop, and go back, find your first double crochet into that stitch. Right there. Put your hook in, loop back on your hook, shrink it down, and bring that through to make a little slip stitch. And chain 1. So that finishes your popcorn. There's 3 stitches left on that block. So 1 double crochet into each stitch. 1, 2, and 3. So go ahead and pop a stitch marker into each of these spaces, just into the whole space. Just so you can keep an eye on where that space is, where you're going to be skipping as you work your way up. Chain 1, skip 1. Now we're going to go right over into that first double crochet after the space. That will be our first double crochet of the next biscuit. So wrap your yarn and 1 double crochet into the first stitch after the space. 1, and we need to do 3. So 1 into the next, that's 2, and 1 into the next for our 3. Now 4 is more, so into the 4th stitch, 4 double crochets. We're doing our popcorn. So there is 2, 3, and 4. All into the same stitch. Pull your hook up, take your hook out, find that first double crochet into that stitch. And we're going to put our hook right into the top of that first double crochet. So put your hook in, loop of yarn back on your hook, slip stitch, just bring it through, and chain 1. So that finishes our second popcorn. And we have 3 stitches left of that biscuit, so 1 double crochet into each stitch. 1, 2, and 3. Chain 1, skip 1 to get over our stitch marker. And 1 double crochet into that first stitch right after. 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. There's number 2. Here's number 3. 4 is more, so popcorn into the 4th stitch. Make 4 double crochets into the 4th stitch. Three and 4. Hook up to make a bigger loop. Take your hook out, find that first stitch. Put your hook in, loop of yarn back on your hook, and bring it through to slip stitch, chain 1. So 3 stitches left, 1 double crochet into each stitch to finish off this row of the biscuit. And we're going to keep going like this all the way along this row. So when you finish your 3 double crochets at the end of your biscuit, chain 1, skip 1, and start another biscuit into the next set of 7. So keep going like this all the way along, and I'll meet you at the end of this row. After your last popcorn, you have 2 stitches left. Don't worry, you did it right. We're always going to be working into our chain for the last stitch of this pattern. So keep going, 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. 1 and 2. And now into the chain, we're just going to go right in, pick up that 1 loop of the chain, and then pop your hook into that space, and that'll bring up 2 loops on the top of your hook. So wrap your yarn into that chain, 2 strands of the stitch on the top of your hook, and make 1 double crochet. So that finishes off row 2. Chain 2, 1 and 2, and turn your work. So for row 3, we're just going to be going back along, making our sets of 7 again. So our chain counts as our first double crochet. So we're going to start into the 2nd stitch right here. So into the 2nd stitch, 1 double crochet, and into the next stitch, 1 double crochet. So that counts as our first 3 double crochets, including our chain. And now into the popcorn, we need to make a stitch. So I just pick this little spot right here, right in between the legs of those stitches. It's a nice big spot waiting for your hook, so I just pop straight over into this space. Wrap your yarn and 1 double crochet just into the top of that popcorn. 1 double crochet. And 1 double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. 1, 2, and 3. Where our stitch marker is, chain 1, skip 1. We're still going to keep this nice space going all the way up our block. Wrap your yarn, and into the first stitch after that space, we're going to start our block. So 7 double crochets, 1 into each stitch, including the popcorn. So here is 2, 3. Number 4 is going to be into that popcorn. Can you see that little hole right there waiting for us? Right there. There's our number 4, 5, 6, and 7. Chain 1, skip 1 when you get to your stitch marker, and start your next block into that first stitch right after the space. So keep going like this all the way along your row, and I'll meet you when you get to the end. I've done 6 double crochets into my last biscuit, and I have my chain to work into. So I'm just going to work into that chain, keeping 2 strands of that stitch on the top of my hook. So wrap your yarn and put your hook into the top of that chain. 2 strands on the top of your hook, making your last double crochet, and that is the end of row 3. To start row 4, chain 3, 1, 2, 3. That counts as our first double crochet and chain 1, and turn your work. We're making new spaces for this row. So for this row, we're going to skip a stitch. So we're not going into the stitch we normally go into. We're going to go into the second, right over here. So wrap your yarn and 1 double crochet into the second stitch. Chain 1. skip one. So we're going to go into the second stitch right over here. 1 double crochet, chain 1, skip 1, and that'll line us up right with that last double crochet before the space. Right into that last double crochet. 1 double crochet, chain 1, skip 1, and now into the first stitch of the next biscuit. 1 double crochet, chain 1. Skip 1, 1 double crochet into the second stitch, chain 1, skip 1, 1 double crochet into the second stitch, chain 1, skip 1, and that'll line us up right with this last stitch of our biscuit. So we want to make sure we're always going into the last stitch of our biscuit, chaining 1, and going into the first stitch of the next biscuit. Want to make sure we're doing that all the way along. So keep going like this all the way along your row, and I'll meet you when you get to the end. At the end of your row, we're going to be skipping over our last double crochet and working into that chain. So we're skipping this double crochet and going into this chain right after. So just get 2 strands of that chain onto your hook. So wrap your yarn and into the top of that chain. 2 strands of the chain on the top of your hook, 1 double crochet. So that finishes the end of row 4. Now row 1 for your repeat will be like this. We're always going to be working into these spaces that we made. So chain 2, 1 and 2, and turn your work. So our chain counts as our first double crochet. So our second is going to be right into that space. So wrap your yarn and into the space, 1 double crochet. We're building our sets of 7 again. And your next will be into the stitch, 1 double crochet. Into the space, 1 double crochet. And into the stitch, 1 double crochet. Into the space, 1 double crochet. And into your stitch. And again, it's the stitch right before that space. 1 double crochet. Go back and make sure you have 7 stitches, including your chain. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Chain 1, skip 1, and you can also go along and move those stitch markers up into your next spaces, your next set of spaces, just to keep an eye on it. So chain 1, skip 1, 1 double crochet into the first stitch after the space. And then into the space, into the stitch. We're building back our block of 7. So into the space gets 1 double crochet, and the stitch gets 1 double crochet. And you want to keep an eye that you end up working your last double crochet into the last stitch before that space. Make sure you have your 7, chain 1, skip 1, and start into the very first stitch after the space, and keep going like this all the way along your row, and I'll meet you at the end. At the end of the row, I've done 5 double crochets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I only have my chain left. So now don't forget, you need to make a double crochet into the space. So that counts as your number 6. And now we're going to go into our chain. So just into that second chain going up. So you can count your chains. So just into that second chain, getting 2 strands of that stitch on your hook, just pulling it up. 1 double crochet. So your edge is nice and straight and looks like that. And that's the end of row 1. So now for the repeat, you're going to keep going along, doing row 2, 3, and 4, and keep going until you have 6 rows completed. So I finished 6 rows of the repeat, or 6 rows of biscuits, and I am finishing on the 3rd row. So I'm not going to do the spaces, we're going to end with solid stitches. So the end of row 3, after you have completed 6 rows of biscuits, cut your yarn, chain 1, pull your hook up and your yarn through, and snug that down to secure. And that finishes our Berry Biscuit Square. If you are doing this, Cal, you can tag me over on Instagram And the tag for this cal is hashtag #SecretStitchesCal2021. I'd love to see all of your squares as you're working along. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. Love to have you join us, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay hooked.